To start with this morning, we'll be celebrating the achievements of a man who really needs no introduction, Dr. Brian Gilvary, former CFO of BP. Having spoken to many of his colleagues and friends over the last few weeks, I've learned a huge amount about Brian, from his leadership skills and his passion for diversity and nurturing talent to his abilities to stay calm under pressure and quickly distill complex information. Before we talk to him directly about his Lifetime Achievement Award, let's first hear from the man himself on his predictions for the years ahead.
So we're truly at extraordinary times today, and the last 6 to 9 months have demonstrated to us more than ever the importance of energy and how it supports the world and how it supported human growth over the last two centuries. If you think about oil, gas, coal, in particular hydrocarbons, and how they've powered human progress, and that human progress almost came to a halt quite starkly back in February, as we saw the impact of COVID-19 and had that spread around the world. And this massive demand side shock we've seen. We've been through many oil price shocks and gas price shocks over the decades, but this one was quite unique in that at the same time additional supply was being brought on the market through Saudi Arabia and Russia and the OPEC Plus agreement at that point breaking down for whatever reasons. We also saw a demand side shock where effectively the world stood still for the best part of 3 months in lockdowns that we saw in the different parts of the world and different economies around the world. And we saw oil demand go from 100 million barrels a day down to 80 million barrels a day at the very low point. That's come back today around about 91 million barrels a day. But it's quite unique that we see both a supply and a demand shock at the same time. And you're starting to see the fallout as you saw various results from different companies at the end of 1Q, 2Q in all sectors, but particularly starkly in oil and gas. That said, what we can now see is what OPEC has done in the last 3, 4, 5 months with their cuts, and now something like 7.5 million barrels of their spare capacity is offline within the OPEC Plus agreement. We're starting to see supply stocks drop and come back down again. On the demand side, we're still seeing, while demand's recovered to around about 91 million barrels a day, we're 9 million barrels a day down below where we were pre-COVID-19. And we probably have something like 6.5 million barrels a day of growth next year. So we won't really get back to 100 million barrels a day until probably 2022 at the earliest. So what does all of that mean? I think what it says is what was probably the most striking thing that we saw during the middle of COVID-19, even with 20 million barrels a day of oil offline and not being used in terms of demand, oil was still the big primary energy source for all energy in the world. It represents about 33% of all energy. 85% of hydrocarbons make up the primary energy mix. But even when the world was shut down, we were still consuming something like 80 million barrels a day of oil. Now, what does that mean as we think about the future and this window that we're in, and in particular, the push from an ESG perspective, in terms of now dealing with probably the big defining moment for our time right now around climate change. What is clear, and what I think COVID has demonstrated, is oil will continue to be a big part of the solution going forward. The issue for us as an industry, and we can sit here now and we should feel proud about what we've done as an industry over the last 100, 150 years, in terms of how oil, gas, and coal to a degree has fueled human progress, as I said at the start. What's now fascinating is how do we make oil, gas, and to a degree coal part of the mix going forward, but deal with the really prompt issues that we have today around CO2 and climate change. And what that means is this industry will now need to reposition itself in a very different way, but deploy and use the technologies that we've developed over many, many decades, and now apply those to different areas. So for example, like carbon sequestration, or the moving of CO2 into other products or carbon sinks. What is fascinating is, And this is a question that came up recently in a conversation I was having with Bloomberg, and particularly off the back of the new potential President-elect Biden coming into power, as we see next year, that the use of natural gas. Natural gas in the United States has been an incredible fuel for energy growth. It's reduced the cost of energy in the United States markedly, which made the United States more competitive. And of course, it's at the lower carbon end of the hydrocarbon mix. And if you think about its potential link into hydrogen as a longer term solution to the energy mix, I think it creates huge amounts of potential. So I think what COVID-19 has reminded us all of is the importance of energy going forward, how it's underpinned energy progress, and yet there is still a massive part for hydrocarbons to play in the future energy demands of the planet. Renewables today are around 5%. Even if they grow 40% per annum, we're still going to need to have hydrocarbons in terms of fueling the world and the economies as population grows by another 2 billion over the next 20 years. However, we're going to have to find a way to deal with the CO2 that is associated with those hydrocarbons. And that is really now the big challenge for this sector, and indeed for the planet, as we now push towards net zero and what net zero will mean for the population around the world.
Thanks so much for those words, Brian, and welcome to the World Energy Capital Assembly. Lovely to have you with us this morning.
Thanks, Amy. And it's set up really well. It looks like it's streaming well as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. This is all very new for us, but so far so good. So thank you for your positive words on the industry moving forwards. Can you give us kind of just a little summary on kind of what your thoughts are in terms of what we're going to see over the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, look, I mean, I think, we've seen now a shock that the system's never seen before in terms of oil and gas. I think oil and gas is going to be crucially important as part of the recovery. I think we've seen something like 9 million barrels a day of demand offline, maybe 6.5 million barrels a day coming online next year. And the things you've seen it with the markets, with the vaccines. And it's quite extraordinary that the vaccines are being developed, still yet to go into fully regulated distribution. But the pace at which they've been developed is quite extraordinary. So I think you're going to see economic activity come back very quickly. I even saw an article last night that shows while Europe's looking at a W, there are sort of square root looking type recoveries. China's clearly in a very strong V-like recovery right now. And that, I think, will start to drive demand going forward. So I think it's probably going to take to the back end of next year before we really start to see demand levels approaching where we were pre-COVID, and probably not till 2022 till we get back to those sort of levels. But I think oil and gas are going to be absolutely crucially important over the next 12 months as we come out of this pandemic.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and I think a lot of the people listening today would agree with you as well. But listen, as I mentioned earlier, the reason we have you with us today is to present you with our Lifetime Achievement Award for 2020. And I thought, before we have a conversation about that, perhaps let's hear first from some of your colleagues and friends on why they think you deserve to win this award.
I think when it came round to it, and I was actually sort of looking for a job when I finished up at university, there were probably only two places I could go. One was BP and one was Shell, because of the nature of the research I was doing. And I guess basically what I'd seen from BP, and interestingly, the reason I joined BP way back in 1986 was all about because it was a company that appeared to make a difference. And it actually cared quite deeply about how it did it.
For me personally, Brian was a boss, a colleague, a mentor, and a very good friend. And recognition for this lifetime achievement is well deserved. And with his boundless energy, I'm sure there's going to be much more to come.
I first met a very young Brian Gilvary when he came to be interviewed as one of my Turtles executive assistants when I was running BP. And he impressed me then as much as he impressed me today.
It was through Everton. We're both mad Everton fans, and when we got introduced, that's pretty much all we spoke about. We were at the rugby, but we ended up talking about Everton.
I knew instantly it was going to be just terrific working with Brian. He's the kind of guy that if you're hanging off a cliff on a rope, he's the guy you want up there holding the rope. So I've always enjoyed working with Brian.
He was always actually such a great guy with lots of fun, and he always stood out because of his great brain, but still being a humble and nice guy.
I first met Brian back in around 2006. Brian was the then CEO of Integrated Supply and Trading for BP, and he was visiting all of the regions and meeting all of the trading teams to reinforce the importance of control, compliance, and acting with integrity in our markets. So when we talk about tone at the top, that's very much the first thing I remember is the fact that Brian was very clear on his messages and how he expected business to be conducted. And, he walked the talk.
Well, Brian is a long-time BP employee, rising up the ladder to eventually become a very successful CFO. But of course, he'd been in every other department along the road. So he was an intimate inside BP's organisation, but he really came into his own when he took over as CFO. And one of his biggest jobs at that time was repairing and recovering the company after the Gulf of Mexico disaster. It was a huge achievement, and what it did was to consolidate BP after the disaster, to allow it to be rebuilt, and in many ways saved the company as well. So, he was an outstanding individual in terms of BP's whole history and development, and I think that legacy lives on.
I mean, Brian is an incredible leader. I think, I think he's one of the best problem solvers I know, probably in the world. I think anyone who knows him would say he's probably got one of the brightest commercial minds in the world. I mean, he's a very, very clever man, and he's incredibly commercial, and he's got a great trading background, and he's got good instinct.
His leadership is founded on a deep belief in people and his ability to bring them along with his own views without them thinking that they're being pulled along just in one direction. He does listen very well.
Characteristics that Brian holds, one of them is an ability to assess the situation and assess people very, very quickly without them knowing they're being assessed. And without the scenarios sort of understanding that actually Brian has taken it all in and absolutely knows the type of people that should be there, the type of people that shouldn't be there. And if he's assessing people, I have him down as an incredibly good judge of character.
Always been a champion of diversity, and he's got a real sort of a knack for spotting talent, exceptional talent, importantly from all backgrounds. I think that champion of diversity is something that I watched and admired and learned from, and I think other people saw it, but a lot of people have benefited from it.
I would say his ability to get the right team around him. So you can only be successful as a leader if you have a great team, and Brian was always willing to take risks. He nurtured people. He had a diverse team and was nurturing diverse talent long before anyone else I know.
He put a lot of thought into it, and he had a very diverse team, and I think as CFO, probably one of the ones where we had more gender diversity potentially than some of the other areas. But it's just something about him that maybe people didn't always realise, is that he was always focused on talent and talent development as well. And I think that's played out through the organisation in terms of the people we see around us today.
People from all backgrounds have a true meritocracy and let people rise through the organisation. I think BP gave me a huge number of opportunities to do that. And I think that goes on today, and it's different now. Then it was really about sort of social mobility and trying to touch a wider proportion of the population, because that would give you a better reflection on society. And we have the same issue today, and now it's about, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but for me, diversity and inclusion is in the broadest sense of the word, in that how do you allow everybody in a company to be successful, bringing all of who they are into the office, I think is really important.
I first met Brian in February 2018. He was kind enough to spare half an hour in his day to learn more about what we were doing at Preach and how we were boosting social mobility by helping people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get top jobs. So as Brian said in a lecture to our students, he was born in Merseyside and lived on a poor estate before going to Manchester University. And he went on to be incredibly successful in the business world, as we know, despite those quite humble roots. And really that is what Preach is all about. It's about making it possible for everyone to achieve their career potential, regardless of their socioeconomic background.
Brian has always was true to himself of where he originated from, where he came from, where he grew up. And he's always been internally and externally to BP, supporting the cause of social mobility. And, you know, in a world where, you know, equal opportunities is not that easy and social mobility is not that easy, I think it takes bold leaders who stand up and say social mobility is what this country needs, what this world needs. And I think I've never experienced a leader like Brian who has supported people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's why I truly believe that he deserves this award so much.
And we had a ship that was cruising up the Persian Gulf. And intelligence started to happen that Iranian gunboats were coming after our ship. This was not a small ship. This was something about the size of 3 football pitches. And Brian said, I'm going to call the Navy. And somehow, Navy frigates all came around. The gunboats tried to swipe one of our tankers. And the Navy helped out, turned around, the ship ran back out of the Persian Gulf. And that heist was prevented by Brian.
And he's a non-executive member of the Admiralty Board, you know, so he's actually got a naval rank. I think he's a sort of 3-star admiral in terms of the pecking order there as well, and he just loves it. So he and I were able to talk about defence matters on an intimate basis, and that's an interest that I think he's going to keep growing, and they value it enormously on that board.
I just want to say a huge thanks to Brian for everything he did for me and others like me. He was probably the toughest boss I worked for in my career, but he was also someone I learned so much from. So for me, it's just an enormous thank you, Brian, and congratulations. You really deserve this award.
Brian is a humble guy, so he's maybe not going to like the attention of this award. But I can't think of anybody who's earned it more and better. And I just really wish Brian and Joe the very best in the future, even though our paths are going to continue to cross.
Well, I think we can all learn a lot from Brian when it comes to getting the right balance between work, home and fitness. He is a true role model. He crams an awful lot in. He excelled in the workplace. He has a lovely family. And he's excelled on this triathlon circuit that he likes to talk about so much. So in many respects, a truly impressive individual, and he'll know what this means. Nil satis nisi optimum.
So Brian deserves this award because he's done a great job in very difficult times in the oil and gas business.
I think he's a brilliant leader. He's fun. People like being around him. And I just think he's one of those people you meet in life that is all rounded. His accomplishments in his personal life and sport, I mean, it sort of knows no end. So I've tremendous admiration for Brian. I've got the greatest respect for the man. And as you say, it's just the beginning of his life in many ways. And I wish him well into the future. He certainly deserves everything that he gets.
he has got incredible drive and passion and determination. You know, but he's, as I say, he's like me. He's a am I allowed to say a short-arsed chippy scouser?
I'm not done yet. It's a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's hugely humbling because it sort of comes from a group of peers. Anything that comes from your peers within the industry is truly, genuinely humbling. But there's plenty more juice in the tank. And so while it's a lifetime reflecting what I've done so far, I think there's a lot more to come yet. And I think this sector is a fantastic sector. And I've had various inquiries about things I might be interested in, but I still love oil and gas, and I think it's got a great future.
So Brian, I hope you enjoyed that video. We had so many people that wanted to get involved and say their comments, and so many people that wanted to comment on the role that you played in their career and in their lives. How did you feel watching that back?
I mean, amazingly humbling. I hadn't appreciated you'd be able to find that many people, and certainly one or two of those certainly shouldn't have been on that list. But I'll just speak to Mr. Dawson straight after. No, like, it's hugely humbling. I mean, it's great. It's very nice that you think that over to work for a company for 34 years, to get the opportunities the company gave me, to being able to leave something with the people that you've worked with is massively humbling. And yeah, this award itself is, you know, it came as a bit of a surprise. I think when I first heard about it, I was a little bit what we call gobsmacked up north. I wasn't quite expecting it. I didn't think I was in that league of people, but no, those words are incredibly generous of all of my former colleagues and friends. And yeah, no, look, it's a massively humbling experience to receive it.
So you know, I think we when we spoke, we felt a bit like, you know, there's still a lot more to come from you. It's not over just yet. What is there to come next? What are you thinking about for the next few years?
Oh, look, I mean, I've had a great opportunity to sort of sit back and reflect on kind of the last 34 years, my career, where I am, just generally. And I think this industry, oil and gas, is a fantastic place. I think it's a big part of the future. If you think about the human progress that's come off the back of energy, and particularly oil and gas over the last 50 or 60 years, I think it's got a lot more life in it going forward, and we're going to have to deal with the big challenges. It's interesting how the world has come together to solve one big challenge called coronavirus, which is it's a virus that's been around for a long time, but has now mutated into a certain form of what was COVID-19. It's incredible how the world has come together around that. The next big challenge, and of which I think the oil and gas sector will be a big part of the solution, is going to be around climate change. And I think as the world now pivots to recognize what we need to do in the space of climate change, I think oil and gas has got a big part to play in that. And we're going to have to find ways to deal with the CO2. But I think you'll probably still see me around this patch going forward. I think it's too exciting an industry not to be part of. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to staying engaged with it going forward.
Fantastic. So we're not losing you to Everton just yet.
No, I've not had the call yet, but after this, I'm not sure I can put my boots on anymore. But I think, yeah, no, not quite yet.
Well, listen, Brian, it was such a pleasure speaking to all of your former colleagues and friends and hearing, you know, what they had to say about you. So huge congratulations on this win of the Lifetime Achievement Award. I think you've got your award there, hopefully, to share.
Very good. In fact, it's going to fit perfectly on the bookcase next to my TNK monument that I've got. But no, it's very good. And it's blue. So you picked the perfect colour. I couldn't be happy with it. If it had been red, it may have been sent back. So thank you for that.
Thank goodness for that. And I'm really hopeful that hopefully, you know, next year we'll be in a position where we can all meet in person and go back to normal with our glad rags and our awards dinner and go ahead and celebrate you once again in person with all of your colleagues around you. So thank you so much again, Brian, and we look forward to keeping in touch and seeing you soon. Good luck with everything to come.
And thanks, Amy. Thanks to the Oil and Gas Council as well. It really is a great moment for me. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.